And now I will switch to English again because we'll have our second talk in English for today. I would like to welcome Laura Simonite, she's from the EMS Press. And in her talk, Laura will introduce a fair, equitable, and sustainable approach to open publication, the subscribe to open model. So Laura will share how the model works in practice, drawing on her experience from the EMS Press implementation as a case study.
So I just want to say hi, everyone, and thanks for inviting me to speak today. So I'm Laura Simonite, Head of Business Development at EMS Press, which is the publishing house of the European Mathematical Society. And I'm going to be talking about Subscribe to Open, which I and the press believe is a practical and sustainable way to achieve equitable open access publishing. There we go. So I thought I'd start by giving an overview of Subscribe to Open because I know not everybody is familiar with this model. So it's first introduced by Annual Reviews in 2017 and was developed by them in collaboration with Raim Crow, who's a senior consultant at Spark in the USA. And both of these parties are still very actively involved with Subscribe to Open and the Subscribe to Open community of practice, which is a collection of publishers, librarians, researchers, all interested in and using the model. So Subscribe to Open is a conditional model for open access, which means that content is only made open if certain criteria are achieved. Most usually, these criteria will be a set number of subscriptions or a specific revenue threshold. But every publisher, chooses their own threshold, their own target, and has their own way of implementing this. But usually it's calculated based on sustainability. In other words, the amount of money needed for the journal to run and operate. And then at a set point in the year, the publisher decides whether or not that threshold, that target has been met, and the content is flipped or not based on the outcome there. In many cases, publishers also choose to offer incentives to subscribers or benefits. And these, again, vary based on the publisher. But common incentives that we've seen in the community of practice include full access to a journal's archive, access to online first articles. So those are articles published ahead of the journal schedule, or guaranteed open access publishing for authors from subscribing institutions if the journal is able to support that sort of model. And one of the key differences, I think, between S2O compared to other dominant open access model is that generally there are no author-facing fees or article processing charges. And that gives authors tremendous autonomy in choosing where they wish to publish. And of course, if content is published open access, then it's published under an open access CC BY license, sometimes non-commercial, but usually just a straight CC BY license. And the model has seen tremendous growth over the last 5 years. So there are now, according to data collected by the community of practice, 378 journals using the model across 31 different publishers. And I find when I'm discussing this model with librarians and researchers that the biggest point of confusion is the workflow. So I thought I'd give you this diagram to look at, and hopefully in talking through it, it'll be quite clear how it works. So just like a normal subscription, in year 1, you subscribe to content for year 2. So in 2025, you subscribe to content for 2026. And then at the point, at the threshold, at the deadline, which is usually, for us, it's the end of January, but for other publishers might have it slightly later in the year. If the threshold, the target has been met, then all the content published within 2026, so in year 2, is published open access under a CC BY license. If the threshold isn't met, then the content remains behind a paywall. And only those institutions who have subscribed will gain access. And then the whole thing repeats every year. So it's not something that happens once and then it's done. It has to reoccur every year, just like a normal subscription. And some publishers may offer incentives for subscribing across multiple years. And that's because it helps to build some security into what is a very conditional and could be a very volatile model. So they may offer fixed pricing, they may offer discounts if you subscribe for more than 1 year at a time, all to try and ensure that open access does happen on a year-on-year basis. So now we'll talk about some of the benefits of the model. And I think if we're talking about benefits of S2O, it makes sense to break it out into these 3 groups: researchers, librarians and libraries, and publishers. So for the researcher, there are no barriers to publication, no APCs, no charges. They can submit their research to whichever journal they choose, and it will go through usual review processes without that block of, well, you can't afford to publish here, so you can't. But even for well-funded researchers from well-funded institutions, or those with read and publish agreements with other publishers, they could still publish with us, say, without incurring any costs. The model complies with most major funder mandates, so it's been endorsed by Coalition S. I'm not aware of any publishers, any funders who don't support the model. And largely that's because it does facilitate and allow immediate green open access. So that's self-archiving of the author-accepted manuscript in institutional repositories or other repositories. And I think ethically, a lot of researchers support this because it's a model that prioritizes sustainability and equity above, and therefore quality above profits and above maximizing outputs. So for librarians, the model helps them to retain control of their budgets and collections, and align their spending perhaps with their ethics and missions that the libraries might have. It administratively is identical to a normal subscription. There's no additional workflows. You just renew, buy through your subscription agent or directly as you always would have done. And that subscription now has the chance of supporting open access rather than just buying access to content. It's guaranteed access to the content, though. If you do subscribe, you do get that year's content. And with us, that's in perpetuity, regardless of whether it's open or not. And as I mentioned before, there are often subscriber exclusive benefits too. And usually, not always, but usually incentive pricing to renew before the discount or buy before the discount so that it can be taken into account for that threshold. And for publishers, so especially small publishers like us, we love it because it leverages existing workflows. It allows us to focus our staffing on production and editorial rather than on sales and administration and marketing. It feels very sustainable for us. We're not worried about submissions the whole time. We're not worried about scrabbling around trying to find APCs that haven't been paid. We just have our usual relationships with the libraries, and it all feels very smooth. And we also like it because we feel that it supports global and disciplinary equity. So we've seen that with APCs, the big losers have been the Global South and the humanities, and maths, especially the maths that we publish, kind of falls somewhere in between the humanities and STEM. So we're very appreciative of a model that kind of helps to level the playing field and gives us a good chance at having full open access. And then the final bit on just subscribe to open is this disambiguation slide. And the reason I wanted to include this is because these are some of the comments that we receive from librarians and researchers as a community when we're discussing subscribe to open. So the first thing to highlight is that subscribe to open is not a donation or a voluntary contribution. It is a subscription. You are buying access to a journal. That might come with extra things, but fundamentally you're buying access to that year's volume of that journal. It's not a new process to accommodate for finance teams or purchasing teams. It's completely compatible with existing workflows. It is not guaranteed open access. It is a conditional model. We do need to reach thresholds because these are journals that have costs to us, so we need to make sure those costs are covered. It's not gold open access. It's not diamond open access. I actually don't think it falls within the color. If we're thinking about the colors, because it's a little bit of gold, it's a little bit of diamond, it's someone's paying somewhere. But it's not, in my opinion, exploitative. And it is compatible with funder mandates, so it's not falling into that transformative agreement trap. And the final thing to say is it's not a model that fits everyone. And even for those publishers and journals that it does fit, we're not all implementing it the same way. Some journals have their own requirements, different timings for different thresholds. Some publishers use revenue, some use subscription numbers. It's a very new model. As I said, it's only really been properly implemented for 5 or 6 years by publishers. And so it's evolving, it's changing, and it will continue to change as more publishers adopt it and find snags and challenges within their own workflows. Okay, so keeping all of that in mind, I'm now going to talk about how we've implemented Subscribe to Open at EMS Press within the mathematics research environment. So EMS Press, just to give you some background on us, we are the publishing house of the European Mathematical Society. We've been around for about 25 years, and we publish 26 journals and 10 new books per year. We've got a collection of almost 300 books covering monographs, textbooks, and proceedings. And all of our journals for the last 2 years have been published under some version of open access. So we have 22 subscribed to open journals and 4 diamond journals. We're a very small team, and we're geographically distributed throughout Europe. Our head office is in Berlin, and the society is headquartered in Helsinki. And we have our own in-house technology team because we find that to develop tools and services for our authors and production team, because we find that most of the tools available to publishers don't really suit the needs of mathematicians. And I just wanted to highlight our mission here as well, because we are a society publisher, and fundamentally we exist to serve our community, and we strive to be inclusive, fair, and sustainable. So why did we pick Subscribe to Open? In 2020, the Society committed itself to equity in publishing via a statement at one of the major maths conferences. There are 3 major maths conferences. This was one of the big ones in 2020. And a significant motivator was that they wanted to achieve open access for the press in a way that didn't exclude or present barriers to anyone wishing to publish. And at the same time, we began to feel quite a lot of political pressure within Europe to implement open access, with the formation of various groups and policy directives. And there's a general sentiment that open access really was the only fair way to disseminate published research. But we also knew that APC funding within maths would be scarce. So even if the EMS hadn't been against it, and even if we'd felt like that was a viable route for us, it wouldn't have been practical. We would have massively reduced the number of people who could publish with us. And especially theoretical maths does not require a huge amount of resource. A chalkboard and a brain, some good ideas. So it's not terribly unusual for researchers to be unaffiliated, which again means that their access to funds, reader-publish agreements, for example, is severely diminished. And another practical consideration is that author pays models, even read and publish agreements, are very complex and generally require sizable teams to administer. And consortial agreements are also quite hard for small niche publishers like us to achieve, because consortia tend to operate with a top-down approach. So the broadest sub amount of content in the biggest package, and then they filter down. And so for a very small publisher with a very niche discipline, we're generally not the top of anyone's list for these bigger discussions and bigger agreements. As I mentioned before, we are a small team, so we really wanted to make sure that we weren't overwhelmed with the complexity of a very detailed, granular payment system. And we also wanted to retain those relationships that we've spent years building with libraries and university departments, and because they provide valuable feedback to us on the direction that the journals should take and the directions that our publishing house needs to go in. And finally, there's a really strong culture of self-archiving, pre-printing, and green OA within mathematics. So gold OA, isn't seen as a priority, and also isn't really compatible with that kind of immediate green self-archiving. And so how do we manage open access at the press? As I've mentioned, we try to keep the administrative side of things as light as possible. It's a subscription, there's no fee to publish, and we're CERU signatories, which means that we don't require license agreements with the institutions that subscribe to us. My team is very small for this, so it's me and a part-time sales administrator who does the bulk of the processing. Growing that team would mean reducing the team elsewhere, so it's really important to us that we keep the priority on the content. And because OA with S2O is either 100% or it's 0%, it's a very easy workflow for our production department. They don't have to run multiple different article workflows at once. They have one, they switch from one to the other depending on what time of year it is and whether things are flipped. Our prices are directly linked to our costs. They are sustainable. They cover the publication costs plus a small development fund, which is either used to develop new journals or it's used to buffer against the kind of economic uncertainty we've been seeing for the last few years. If we do achieve a surplus, then we reinvest it in EMS press projects. So that would be the technology and tools development, most recently accessibility workflows, or it's directed back to the society to fund their charitable initiatives such as travel grants, conference grants, educational initiatives, basically developing mathematics within Europe and more broadly across the world. And our subscription fees are kept as low as is possible. All of our journals are cheaper than the average APC, which now sits at almost €3,500 per article. It does mean that sometimes we end up with slightly higher price percentage increases than I know libraries would like sometimes more than the 3%, but it's because our costs have risen and we just have to make sure that they're covered to keep the journal moving, keep the journal going in a sustainable way. And another thing that we do to manage our open access and make sure that it's sustainable and reaching everybody it needs to reach is we try to leverage as much existing infrastructure as possible. So we have self-service metrics via liblinks for librarians. We're present in all of those big discoverability and indexes. And we recently partnered with the OA Switchboard so that authorship metrics are being pushed back out to the library as well. So to give you a sense of how quickly we were able to flip our content, I just want you to see that for the first 20 years, there was almost no open access. I think we had 2 open access, diamond open access journals, maybe 3. So things were fairly static and stable. In 2019, the publishing house moved from Basel to Berlin with a new managing director, and that's when all of this open access stuff kicked off. We launched our pilot in 2020 with 10 journals after consulting with our community and our subscribers and deciding that this was definitely the right path to take. The pilot was a success, and every year since then, we've just added journals and added journals. In 24 was the first time we were completely open access as a publishing house. That's continued into 25, and I have no reason to believe it won't continue into 26. And to just give you a picture of the scale and of content, so since launching the model and having our first year open in 2021, we've managed to publish 3,000 articles under CC BY licenses using Subscribe to Open. So you can see it really achieves rapid OA at quite a significant scale. And you can see that the difference between subscription and open access content has completely inverted. You see in 2025, it sort of looks like it's the other way around. That's just because we have a buildup of content towards the new year that hopefully, if we're successful in 26, will all flip in February, at the end of January. So what are the benefits of Subscribe to Open? As I've mentioned, it's administratively simple. We believe that it fairly distributes the risks and costs between us and our community. It's a model that really suits the practicality of mathematics. And ethically, we believe it to be fair, equitable, and sustainable. No one's excluded, and the press is allowed to continue to operate in a sustainable way. In terms of challenges, I'm just making sure I've got enough time. In terms of challenges, new journals are a problem because in order for Subscribe to Open to work, it needs subscribers, and adding subscriptions is difficult for libraries. Generally, policy is driven towards APC models, centralized and consolidated, so it can be quite difficult to figure out funding for non-APC journals. Open access licenses and AI, this isn't just a Subscribe to Open problem, but CC BY licenses and AI aren't very compatible because of the requirement for attribution. Funders keep changing their requirements, I guess down to the law of unintended consequences. Library budgets are shrinking, but at the same time, our costs are going up due to developments and policy decisions. And we also have a delicate balance between maintaining goodwill initiatives, i.e. our free-to-read archive, and sustainable revenues. So that's something we have to be constantly monitoring and assessing. And this is just some of the ways that libraries can support us and institutions and actually researchers. It's just considering how spending could be changed within your department, within your library, pushing back against gold OA if you have a voice and a platform to do so, engaging with smaller publishers like ours who have mission focused journals, and are, aligned more with the idea of supporting scholarship and scholarly communication beyond profit. Supporting diversity in the ecosystem. It's important that we exist. If we don't exist, then libraries get squeezed even harder by large commercial entities because there's literally no one else to provide the materials for them. But I think it's important as well that, let us know how we can help you. If you're a researcher and something we're doing isn't working for you, tell us. If you're a librarian and you wish we could do something differently, just tell us. We can be flexible. We want to work with you. So in conclusion, Subscribe to Open has facilitated rapid OA at scale. And we've been able to leverage existing infrastructure and partnership with other infrastructure projects to drive discoverability and visibility of our content and keep things simple. We've had success with the model for the last 4 years. We have no reason to believe that's going to change, but we are aware that it could, and we are constantly monitoring the situation on how we can change things. But the thing I want to leave you with is that we believe that in our context, Subscribe to Open is the only model that meets the needs of us, our authors, and their institutions. And we want you to use your budget to advocate for greater diversity and equity by supporting publishers like EMS Press. Thank you. So there's some URLs you can follow. That's the Press, the Society, and the Subscribe to Open Community of Practice. If you're interested in that, I would highly recommend coming to our meetings. They're always interesting. And my contact details are there too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Again, I'm checking the Q&A and the chat and hands. I see nothing there. So I've got some questions for you. Some authors are concerned that if they choose to publish, for example, they have a mandate from their funder that they need to publish open access, and they choose a journal which is under a Subscribe to Open model, which is at the time of their choosing, it's open. But they're afraid that perhaps before the article is accepted for publication, which is a process that may take some time, that the journal may flip back into a subscription model. So I've 2 related questions to that situation. So first, whether you actually have experience of this ever happening, of a journal flipping back to from the open access under Subscribe to Open back to subscription. And if that does happen, will the author still have some option to publish open access so they can actually fulfill their funders' policies?
Yeah, so we haven't personally had, as a publishing house, had that experience of a journal flipping back yet. But I totally understand the point, because especially in mathematics, the review time can be very long. It can be like over a year. So the main option is the green open access, the author accepted manuscript archiving. Within Europe, we tend to find that that is a compatible route to open access for authors. And that's something we encourage them to do regardless of whether they think the journal is going to flip or not. It is one of the risks with Subscribe to Open that the journal might not be open, but with the green, we do try and facilitate that version being out there in an accessible way. I hope that that's a fair answer.
Yeah, thank you. And perhaps I imagine the Subscribe to Open model works great for journals. But we have encountered today during the discussions on Diamond Open Access the questions of books, which is especially a problem in humanities where they publish monographs and books, and a model to publish books in open access, it's very hard and it costs a lot. So do you see a way that the Subscribe to Open model could be utilized for books and monographs as well?
So we're not currently using it for books just because our books program is quite small and it's a capacity thing. But we have seen some publishers using a version of S2O to get those books to open access. So I think it's Cambridge University Press have a model whereby the revenue that a book achieves throughout its lifetime is obviously aggregated, and at the point at which they reach the threshold for sustainability, which I guess they set internally, then the book becomes open access. So it could take a few years, but that seems like a reasonable way to flip books, I think. It's certainly something we're interested in doing at the Press in the future.
So thank you very much for being here and for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. I think that Subscribe to Open is really a great model going forward, and we can just hope that libraries and the international pressure can push even larger publishers, commercial publishers, to adopt some models like that.